Hey, Alex, it's recording day 2. What do you think?
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah,
We got through the first couple episodes pretty well, so moving
yeah.
along, moving along. Excited for our guest today.
I am actually. Yeah, I quite like Bryan. We've been doing some work with his organization and the Supplier Diversity Alliance Council, SDAC, for the last year or so. So we've got to know him a little bit and get to know his sense of humor. But I hadn't met him in person until just a few months ago, and it was sort of an interesting circumstance because we regularly meet with different members of Parliament to talk to them about certification as a diverse supplier. We want it included in the federal government's current procurement policy that they're putting together. So
Hmm.
we're always having these Zoom calls, and so we had one member who was not interested in a Zoom call. He wanted something in person, and it was in Ottawa, and I just happened to be leaving from Mont Tremblant, so I thought I would stop in Ottawa. But in Mont Tremblant, I was visiting a close family member who was very, very ill and has since passed away. So
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
met up in Ottawa. We ended up going to Ottawa and met up with Bryan the next morning to. I think it was later that same day. We traveled from Mont Tremblant, and then I got to the hotel and
Busy
changed
as
everything,
always.
and then I met, and then I went and met him, walked over and met him, and so I'm flustered, and so of course he made the mistake of asking me how I was, and so I immediately started to cry because I was like, oh my goodness. So I tried to give him a little bit a little bit of a description of what was going on, and I basically wound up saying, listen, I'm emotionally well, and the other thing is when I get stressed, my whole body kind of explodes. So nothing was fitting, and I was super uncomfortable, and I was like swollen up, and so anyway, so so poor Bryan. This is the first time we meet, and this is my reaction, and so I said I'm emotionally and physically like a total mess, but intellectually I still have it going on, so we should be all right for this meeting. So it was great. We had a lovely walk, and then we ended up going not right to Parliament Hill, but to another government building. So we had to go through some level of security. And
Okay.
I noticed that my bag was, they were spending a little bit more time on the bag that I had. And I thought, oh, I know why they're doing this. And so I just went up to one of the security people and said, are you finding like a little, like a exclamation mark shaped piece of metal? And she's like, yeah, we are. What is that? I said it's my pipe for smoking smoking cannabis because I have PTSD, and so there are ways that I manage it, and I had anxiety from that whole week, and so I had brought that with me on the walk so that I could sort of mellow out my nerves, and so they wound up being quite interested in the whole thing and
Oh,
wanted to
that's
take it
good.
apart, and it's kind of a unique one with a case, and it closes and it's magnetic, and so they had never seen one like that before, but it was kind of a fun chat. And then, but Bryan is standing there like, what? What is with this woman? I really
This
hope
was
she can
like the
pull this
first day you
meeting
had
off.
met Bryan.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, we met on Zoom calls, and I've been in meetings with MPs before, so he knows I can, hold it together. But I can only imagine how he must have been feeling by.
Auspicious beginnings.
Yes, but I guess these are the things we have to do to manage our
Oh,
anxieties and our mental health. And
absolutely. Yeah. No,
yeah,
it's good that the security was very understanding about it.
I know. Yeah, it turned out to be kind of fun, and thankfully I had gotten Bryan to agree to a podcast prior to that event, like on the walk after the tears, but before the pot, and so and so he was, beholden to me, and so thankfully he's here, and let's let him in and start the show. Bryan, how are you?
Doing very well in yourself.
Good, thanks. Oh, and you've got a suit jacket on. I love it. Thank you so much.
Nope. I was having a bad hair day, so I decided to compensate with a suit.
You got to distract from the bad hair with the good outfit. Yeah, I've been there. I add a little makeup in too, just to go with. So I just want to let you know we're already recording. Alex and I have a little bit of a chit chat prior to the podcast. So I want to thank you so much for being here. I was telling Alex, and Alex, thanks so much for the chit chat. If you can hop off the screen
Yeah,
now, and I'll.
absolutely. Yeah, I'll head up. Bryan, it's very nice to meet face to face. We're very excited to have you.
Likewise,
Yes,
thank you
Alex
very
is the
much,
one you've been
Alex.
communicating back and forth with for the last 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, I'll make
But
my way back to behind the scenes.
thanks, Alex. I was just telling Alex and Andrew, who's our podcast producer, about our initial meeting in person, and the tears and the pot pipe, and you must have just been shaking your.
Not at all. Not at all.
But listen, I really want to thank you for being here and welcome to our IWSCC show on sort of all things supplier diversity and brought to you by Remote Video, who's producing the podcast. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that there are ASL interpretation is here as well, and that's been provided by Maple Communications Canada. So we're really happy to have both of these companies who are diversely owned, by the way. They are part of the IWSCC Diverse Supplier membership, and so we're really happy to walk our talk. And I just want to take a minute to introduce myself. I've mentioned IWSCC a couple of times, and that's Inclusive Workplace and Supply Council of Canada. And what we do is we find businesses that are owned by veterans or people with disabilities that want to do business with large corporations in Canada. And we put them through a certification process, just essentially shows that they are at least 51% owned, operated, and controlled by that diverse person. And of course, we look for the proof of either disability or veteran status. There's a bit more paperwork to it than that. But that's what we do. And then we take these suppliers and we introduce them to corporate Canada, who has a specific interest in diversifying their supply chain. And that's kind of what IWSCC does. So I wanted to just, Bryan, if you could take a minute and introduce yourself. Now, listen, I took a look at your bio online, and I mean, I was already impressed with you with the work that you're doing, and you're leading the work this time around, and you're doing such a great job. I'm going to get you to talk about that work a little bit later, but I wanted you to you know what, brag a little bit about yourself and some of the stuff that you have done. Tell us about Bryan and what is it that you're doing now, but I'd love to hear a bit about what you've done in the past, because it's very cool from my perspective.
Thank you very much, Deidre, and thank you for having me on the podcast. It's truly a pleasure. My name is Bryan Detchou. I'm a consultant, a government relations consultant at Crestview Strategy. Prior to that, long time staffer on the Hill. My journey began as a page at the House of Commons in 2013, almost 10 years ago. And after that, I went on to work for the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Usher of the Black Rod at the Senate. I've also worked for a senator. I've worked internationally at the ICC, the International Criminal Court. So those are some of my career experiences and some of the background that I've brought to my work at Crestview, some of the knowledge and experience that I've brought in my role at Crestview, and so far it's been wonderful.
How long have you worked at Crestview?
I've been at Crestview. It's almost my 1 year anniversary, actually. I think I began May 19th, 2021. So I'm not sure when this podcast will be released, but by then perhaps I would have passed the 1 year at Crestview.
Past the 1 year. So you pretty much your entire time with Crestview, you've been dealing with us folk at the Supplier Diversity Alliance Canada. I'm so sorry about that.
No, not that. Yeah, I think the SDAC was actually one of my first clients. One of the first clients I was onboarded on.
Well, that's great. I'm so thrilled to have you working with us because, I mean, we all just love it and we love having you there and you're so effective at what you do. We're excited about something called A Day on the Hill that you've really been instrumental in putting together. So maybe can you explain a little bit more about it from your perspective, and then I'll just add maybe a bit from ours if need be. I'd love to hear it in your words.
Of course. So what we've been organizing is an advocacy day. So of course, when we reach out to these different offices on the Hill and we engage with them in different over the course of the year, those are one way of engaging with elected officials or public servants. A day on the Hill allows us to focus our efforts and hit many birds with one stone. Have many people in the same room at the same time, engage in different discussions. And of course, one thing that has been a reality in our engagement in the last year has been the pandemic, which has meant that for the most part, I would say 98% of our meetings have been virtual meetings, which are good and allow for meaningful dialogue, but nothing truly replaces in-person meetings and the connections that you can have once you meet someone in person. And Deidre, I think the first time that you and I met in person, we had a meeting with an MP and you saw the difference between a virtual meeting and an in-person meeting. That meeting ended up lasting perhaps well over an hour, and you're able to speak about the topics that you went in hoping to speak about, but also different subjects, and you're not looking at your clock because you have maybe a short meeting, another meeting that you have to hop on
Yeah.
at the top of the hour. So a day on the Hill allows us to meet several people, and in this instance, meet several people in person. So meet new faces and re-engage with people that we've already discussed with in person. So they're always fun. I know that whether it's stakeholders or MPs or staffers, everyone truly enjoys those meetings. If not for the meaningful dialogue, then at least for the free food.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm there if there's food. If there's food, count me in, I'll be there, no questions asked. Especially if it's not food I typically eat. I'm always interested in having food that's like outside the box for me, which actually the box is getting larger and larger. But so I'm kind of with the cart before the horse there because I want you to talk about how supplier diversity has sort of intersected with what you do. And I think in there also there'll be some further information about what it is you're doing specifically for the Supplier Diversity Alliance Canada. And I should mention that the Supplier Diversity Alliance Canada is a group that is made up of 4 members that are Supplier Diversity Councils. So there is Canadian Aboriginal and Minority Supplier Council that we've referred to in previous podcasts. We've had Cassandra Dorrington as a guest. There's WBE Canada, Women Business Enterprise Canada, and again we had Catherine Gross from there as a guest as well. And then there is the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, or CGLCC. And we haven't had them as a guest yet, but we absolutely plan to. So we just we're together as a group, and we work on advocacy, we work on research, and we work on outreach. So advocacy, Bryan, I'll get you to talk about shortly. About outreach is outreach to suppliers and corporate members who are interested in learning more about supplier diversity. So we're traveling to the East Coast in early June, and then we're traveling to the West Coast later on in June. So certainly reach out to your supply council if you're a supplier, and you can always reach out to IWSCC if you're looking for more information on these events that we're running. I put the cart before the horse in that you've talked about one of the things that you're doing on behalf of Supplier Diversity Alliance Council of Canada, sorry. And so I'd like to just bring us back around to that. So how does supplier diversity sort of intersect with what it is you're doing at Crestview and of course for us?
I would say that uh, for us, our job is not to be the subject matter expert. Uh, that's where you come in. Our job is to understand your issues, understand your goals, understand and try to build a strategy to help you achieve those goals. So I've learned a lot through our biweekly meetings and being on these calls with yourself and your colleagues with different government stakeholders about supplier diversity, because I cannot claim to have been an expert prior to our engagement, nor can I claim to be an expert now. Uh, but I've obviously learned. I've learned a lot. But our role is always to be that bridge, to be the bridge between associations, organizations, non-for-profits, and government. So allowing the two to whether it's to facilitate communication or create a better understanding, improve policy, improve programs, which I would say it has been the bulk of our work. There has been some education, but I would say some of our main goals have been around improving policy and programs. That is where we come in. That's where I myself, as a government relations consultant, and my colleagues at Crestview in the GR branch of our firm would interact with the SDAC.
All right, great. And so, yeah, I mean, as much as it pains me to get up so early on Friday morning, and you know, for many people, it's not early, but I am not one of those early morning people. And I'm
Neither
learning
am
from
I.
a podcast that Andrew, our producer, has his own podcast show, and I was listening to one in the last couple of days about sleep, and I'm told you don't have to be a morning person. It's not necessary. Some people are morning people, and some people aren't. So I'm going to no longer feel guilty about that and continue to complain about the early meetings. So,
I am the same. I am the same. It got me
okay.
through all my degrees in university. So you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I'm a night owl, and I'm no longer gonna be ashamed about it.
Good, good. Maybe we should have an uprising at the SDAC meetings.
Well, we have, I think between us, we have two out of five votes. I think we just
Yeah, it's
need one
getting
more
close.
person in
Just got to
to
swing
get a swing
somebody.
vote.
Yeah, which actually kind of brings me maybe to my next subject. I'm curious, although I know about it, I'd like to hear from your perspective. What is lobbying, and how do you do it? Like, why do people do it?
Very good question. I think perhaps a definition of lobbying would be the act of legally attempting to persuade government to uh, act a certain way or change policies or legislation. So it's a legal act of persuasion. Is perhaps how I would describe it at a high level. Um, in terms of what we do is we engage with government. We help organizations, non for profits, associations, NGOs engage with government. Uh, that can only be done with an effective strategy. If you hope to achieve any goal when it comes to changing policies or engaging with government, you have to have a strategy. Uh, that is the most important part. Otherwise, your chances of success are very minimal. So I would say that's apologies. That's where we come in. In terms of why people lobby, different reasons. It can be for a change of policy, change of program, uh, wanting the government to act a certain way or change their behavior. Um, and I would say that there are a lot of groups who historically perhaps have not had as much of a relationship with government. I think that we're used to seeing government announcements made with some big name companies, big name firms.
Right.
I think we're used to
Yeah.
seeing that, but I think there's a lot of groups that perhaps don't even know that they can engage with government or don't
Yes.
even know how to engage with government. And I know that's something that um, I knew long before I joined Crestview, and I guess this side of the policy making machine. At my time at the Senate, and even in my personal life, I know of many small groups that perhaps don't see themselves represented in government and in policy and programs, and they want changed, but they're not sure how to do it, and they think that the only way to do it is to have the coffers of a huge
Right.
Fortune 500 company, because that's the only way to do it. And perhaps less so in Canada, but I know that there can be perhaps negative perception to lobbying. I think that's perhaps to some, it's
Hmm.
uh, people representing big tobacco and trying to get cigarettes in the hands of
Yeah.
children, which is which
Yes.
which is not the case. I think there's a lot of great companies, great associations that just want uh, to be heard, to be listened to by government. I would say that. Uh, in the ideal world, you have a government who's trying to do its best, and you have associations that are also trying to do their best. And sometimes communication uh, is not always easy, and
Hmm.
that's what we're trying to facilitate. Just a random example, you have governments that perhaps have very ambitious um, climate goals. Um, And in order to meet those climate goals, sometimes they set very ambitious dates, whether that's in uh, election platforms, for example. And
Right.
then you can
Yes.
have the industry that may share the same goals, but may have very realistic hurdles that could prevent them from meeting those goals if this isn't met or if that isn't met. So sometimes all they need is dialogue. Well, we share the same goal. We want to reduce this or cut that. However, uh, we probably cannot do it by 2025. A more realistic target would be 2027 because of this,
Okay.
because of X, Y, and Z, because of supply chains, because of this, because of that. So
Right.
sometimes it's just facilitating conversation so that the stakeholders and the government understand that the goals are shared. However, perhaps in some of the details, further dialogue is needed for better collaboration.
Well, and the government just can't know everything, right? I mean, I know they often can say that they do, or people think that they do, but the reality is it's important to share. So, if someone wants to lobby the government, do they have to like engage an organization such as Crestview? Can I know that you talked about having a strategy, but is this something that an organization could do on their own, particularly if they don't have the budget for engaging a GR firm?
Uh, uh, it is something that people can do on their own. I would always perhaps recommend uh, getting expert advice, and that can be in the shape of Crestview. There are a lot of companies that also have uh, government relations professionals in house, so it doesn't
Okay.
necessarily have to be a big firm. And again, firms come in all different shapes and sizes, and
Yeah.
uh, engagement with firms can also be tailored in terms of
Okay. Good
it can
point.
be for a specific project. It can be long term, it can be short term, it can be stop and go,
Right.
depending on different waves. So there's always flexibility on that front, but it is something that organizations can do on their own, if they're able to strategize and devise plans. Sometimes it's
Fine.
and perhaps this is something that you've seen yourself, Deidre. It can be a huge lift.
Yes.
And there are a lot of things that happen within government. A lot of deadlines that perhaps people are not aware of. Um,
Yes.
a lot of decision makers that perhaps people are not aware of, because decisions are not only made by PMO and cabinet.
Hmm.
Depending on your issue, you may have to engage with people whose names are not as familiar to you as Justin Trudeau or Chrystia Freeland.
Right.
So having all that knowledge is necessary to have an effective strategy. But of course, everyone has the ability to contact their local MP or contact ministers and try to engage that way as well. All emails and phone numbers are of public information. But
Right.
I
Yeah.
would encourage for an effective strategy. Uh, there are professionals that do that quite well. Much like if you would like legal advice, I would always recommend going to a lawyer.
To a lawyer, yes, absolutely. So I've been in experiences in the past where on behalf of my organization, have had to register as a lobbyist, even though I wasn't necessarily actively lobbying like we are, for example, with SDAC.
Mhm.
So are there circumstances where that is necessary that people need to know about? I mean, what is registering as a lobbyist, and why and when do you do it?
Mhm.
I'm hoping you
So
have this knowledge.
yes, so no, of course, compliance is key. Compliance
Yeah.
is key. I myself, as a GR consultant, I am a registered lobbyist. I am, for example, registered to lobby on behalf of the SDAC, and I file my monthly communication reports on time each month. But yes, in house GR professionals, or sometimes those individuals may not even be GR professionals, but they do engage with government,
Yes.
sometimes may also have to register as well. I think there's a certain threshold. You'll excuse me for not knowing the
Yes,
exact
of
numbers,
course.
but I believe it.
Yeah.
If more than a certain percentage of your duties and responsibilities are lobbying, then you would need to register. But I'm less
Okay.
familiar with the non agency part of
Yes, of course.
the lobbying act.
Well, next time read it up a little bit better before you show up on our podcast, will you? So our theme for this month of May, IWSCC has a theme each month, and our marketing and our newsletter and blog and everything all fits within that theme. And so for this month, it's research, because we do have a veteran research project we've been working on for some time. It wound up getting delayed for a number of reasons over the past probably 4 or 5 months. but we're releasing it in May. So when I started this organization, I realized that there was very little stats on either veteran entrepreneurs in Canada or disabled entrepreneurs in Canada, and so determined that when we got to the point in an organization, as an organization, where we could manage this, we would start that research. So our questionnaire goes out on the 24th of May, and it has to do with everything to do with veteran entrepreneurs in Canada. We need that information so that we can track it. We can, then improve upon it. And when this project is done, we'll be working on the same thing for disabled entrepreneurs in Canada. So I don't want to take away from the Bryan show to talk about that particular research project,
Mhm.
but that is our theme for today. And so I wanted to know if there's a way that research fits into these lobbying types of circumstances. Like, do you use research when you're lobbying the government?
Yes, 100%. First, I spoke a lot about strategy. Uh, Research is part of that strategy. Uh, to have an effective government relations strategy, there's a lot of background work that needs to be done to identify, for example, government priorities, and to try to align your goals perhaps with government priorities. Some of the research may also allow you to tweak your messaging depending on your audience. Developing an effective strategy may mean that you do not, in terms of your key messaging, you may not speak to an Alberta MP the same way you would speak to an Ontario MP. You may not speak to
Okay.
a conservative MP the same way that you would speak to a liberal MP. You may not speak to a rural MP the same way you would speak to an urban MP in terms of their ridings. You may not speak to an elected official the same way that you would speak to a public servant. Much like you may not speak the
Okay.
same way to a member of parliament as you would speak to a senator. So a lot of research is required to conduct an effective strategy. But in terms of some of the type of research that you were describing prior, that is also very important. Obviously, a huge role that people are not always aware of committees, whether they be at the House of Commons and the Senate, is conducting reports. These reports, it's research. That's important because government is asked to do a lot. It does do a lot in many different fields, and sometimes we can feel that government moves very slowly, and perhaps it's the case in
Yes.
certain instances. But that's because they want to make sure that they are doing things right. Um, so that's why they have a lot of research. That's why there are a lot of consultations. It can be quite a long process to see change in legislation. So when you're able to approach a member of parliament with research, with statistics that they're able to present at a committee, that they're able to present to their peers, that they're able to present to their working group, their parliamentary caucus, cabinet. Um, you've then done a part of the job for them. And that is very
Right.
important, and it also solidifies your arguments because I'm sure you can imagine that whether it be MPs and certainly ministers, how many groups and associations and
Yes.
stakeholders contact them, um, uh, asking for this and for that, or complaining about this and that. So I think the important thing is not just approaching government with your concerns, but also approaching them with solutions. And the best solutions are always backed by facts, data, science, and research. So that's why I would say that research is extremely important and a big piece of any effective government relation strategy.
So we're on the right track, putting together some numbers regarding veteran and disabled entrepreneurs. Well, I know every
100%.
time you reach out to the SDAC crowd looking for research, I'm always like crickets back here in the IWSCC space because there just isn't very much out there. I mean, there's some, but there isn't very much. So in the questions that I gave you, I asked you, what is the right kind of research, and why do some things not get researched? It's a very vague kind of question. I realize that now as I'm reading it, so I apologize for that. But what are things I guess how does someone determine if something is worth researching from a government perspective? Well, from your perspective, but as a
Mhm.
government may see it.
Um, as you identified, it is possible to identify gaps. Uh, Committees, both at the House of Commons and at the Senate, and public servants will try their best to prepare reports and conduct research, but there may be gaps in their research. Those gaps can be there for many different reasons. Perhaps sometimes it's having a blind spot. Uh, when it comes to the House of Commons, or obviously it's a political institution, so sometimes politics is a reason why a certain term is left out or not researched, because these committees are also sometimes, I mean, they vote. You have to compromise, and sometimes compromise means certain things fall through the cracks. So
Right.
sometimes in conducting research, the research that you can conduct might be just that, researching the things that fell through the cracks. In addition to that, uh, governments and committees conduct reports and research as much as they can, but there are a lot of things happening, and that means that they're not necessarily going to come out with a report on supplier diversity every year.
Right.
Uh, their last report could have been 2 parliaments ago, which could easily be 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9 years ago,
Years ago,
and
yeah. Yeah.
and you would know that that information can then be very much outdated. So if you have governments still perhaps using that data, um, then it's outdated data. So sometimes sometimes conducting research and or identifying what you should research, that's another way to do it. Is there something that the government hasn't looked at in a while that should be refreshed? When the government
Right.
is speaking about our group, are they speaking it from the reality of now? Or are they speaking about us in the way we existed 10, 15 years ago? Or were they, some issues are only being talked about now? So we've perhaps seen a lot of reports on diversity and inclusion, but it
Yes.
never featured certain groups that we now include in that group. So identifying your research is sometimes seeing those gaps, seeing those blind spots, and trying to fill those gaps, and trying to see what others perhaps can't see. So sometimes
Yeah.
the research that you can do as a stakeholder, of course, nothing prevents you from researching the same things that government research, but sometimes you can attempt to complement that research, add to it, or add additional lenses that perhaps they did not take into consideration. Because despite their best efforts, despite how many experts they can bring to the table, uh, it is possible that gaps can exist. So
Yeah.
it's up to us sometimes to try to identify those gaps
And
and
push it
help where we
forward.
can. There you go.
Yeah. Well, this is with our veteran research questionnaire, although it's not necessarily geared directly for the government, we're looking to do, some information for veterans, but also for our corporate members to better support veterans. But we did include questions about government procurement and whether or not they've been involved and what, where their barriers and that type of thing, because I think it's important that the government understand if there are specific barriers to veterans to doing business with the government. I think that's important for them to know. So,
Mhm.
how do we make research sexy? I mean, you say research, and everyone's like, that's the one time you get a good night's sleep when someone's talking about research. How do we make it sexy?
My answer to that is to attach it to an end goal.
Okay.
Attach it to an end goal.
Yeah.
If necessary, see it as a means to an end. Um,
Okay.
there, I would say once again, I would stress that it would be very difficult to achieve your goals uh, without research. Um, and if you see it that way, perhaps if the act of researching itself is not exhilarating to you, then see it as a means to an end. And when it comes to the work that we're doing, I know it's something that uh, I am passionate about because I think that it's important. I think it's an important piece. Well, I think it's a very important policy. I think that it is Canada benefits when we are all represented in the
Absolutely.
procurement system.
Yes.
So and when and I'm sure you are very much passionate about the issue as well, and all the other founding members of the SDAC are very much passionate. So it's seeing research as a vessel, and I would say that that's one way to make it sexy. I think that once you achieve your goals and you're happy, that has been achieved. Um, that
That's
the
sexy.
time that you exactly achieving goals is sexy. There you go. So like
You know
I
what?
think
I love it, and
it's
I had
rebranding
not
it.
thought about it. I had not thought about it that way. So for me, it's not really been my forte. I like to look into things, but I think if I were said, okay, Deidre, you have to spend the next 40 hours researching this one topic, I'd be like wandering off all the time online because
Hmm.
that's sort of how my brain works. So I'm
Hmm.
always really impressed with people who can buckle down and do the research. And of course, I'm not one of the people within IWSCC who's doing that.
Hmm.
But we've contracted someone to do that. But that is great. So I have on here what are some tips and tricks for lobbying the government. I think you've given us quite a few of them. Have a strategy. If you can, procure an organization such as Crestview to help you out. Do your research on the people that you're talking to prior to the conversation with them, which is always great because Bryan sends us a bio, a week or so ahead of the meeting, so we've got some time to figure out who it is that we're talking to.
Hmm.
Would there be any others that you would suggest?
um Perhaps a couple. It's always good to set goals, not only short term, medium term, long term goals, but even when you go into a meeting, you should have goals. What do you want out of that meeting? What are you hoping to get out of that meeting? Is it an introductory meeting? Is it a meeting where you're trying to convince, persuade, educate? I think you should. It's always important to set goals because once you've set goals, you're able to measure whether uh, you've been successful or not in your engagement, or whether that meeting was truly worth the time or not, or what are the next
Mhm.
steps, for example.
So know what
Um,
your ask is. Like when you go in there, know what that ask is and be solid with it. Yeah, I
Correct,
like it. Yeah.
correct. And in addition to that, uh, being ready to adapt your message. I mentioned
Mhm.
that earlier. You have to know who your audience is, and knowing who your audience is not only knowing their political affiliations, their riding, their province, but also perhaps their background. I mean, that's the reason why we send bios prior to meetings. It's what in their how what are there links between some of their previous experiences and
Yes.
what experiences are they bringing in their role as an MP. And there are 338 MPs. They all have different backgrounds. They all have different educational experiences, work experiences, and sometimes if you're able to find connections there, that's extremely important as well. So you have to be able to adapt your message and not just have it's important to set goals and have like 2 3 topics and ask or whatnot, but to be able to tailor that to your audience is I would say very important.
I was just going to say that's one of the things that I appreciate about getting those bios because I'm able to go, oh, this guy used to be a small business owner, or this one's
There you go.
particularly interested in vets, or works in the area of accessibility or disability. So it allows me
Correct.
to bring that topic up when we're meeting.
Correct. And it again, when engaging with these individuals, perhaps it allows you to bring up your asks or your issues um, in a different way, or
Hmm.
Trojan horse your problem in a
Yeah.
in a different way. So yeah, if someone is a previous small business owner, I'm sure that they would have quite a lot of previous knowledge on at least procurement, perhaps not supply diversity, but it means that they know what procurement is and you can build from there. Others, you
Right.
may have to explain the procurement system perhaps a bit more than others. And if someone has military experience, for example, then you're able to attack the issue from a different angle. So that all of that is extremely important.
I guess it helps you too not to say to know who not to say anything negative about.
That is also that is
Yeah.
also, yes, very much important. But and again, when you're engaging with individuals from different political parties, that's another way that you can approach the
Hmm.
issue. Members of the government, of course, follow instructions, whether it's ministers from their mandate letters or from platforms. So those are their marching orders. So you obviously have to try to align to that. And sometimes when it comes to other parties, perhaps your messaging is slightly tweaked. Perhaps when speaking about supplier diversity, for example, if you're talking to a conservative member of parliament, perhaps you present your case in terms of the benefits to the economy, to the post-COVID
Right.
economic recovery. Um, and so your message is the same. The way you're approaching it is what's different. So this is not completely remixing your message depending on who you speak to. It's making sure that it is presented in a way that is very much palatable.
That's great. That's a lot to think about, but it all makes so much sense, and I can see why you do such a great job for us because you know what you're doing. So we're getting down to the end of the podcast, and again, I just want to thank you for your time here. And it's really just you and I here. There's really no one else. So I wanted you to maybe lean in and give us some little secrets or something. Without giving any names away, I'm interested to know if there's some experience or something that's happened, some goods on what's happened in the past that you were aware of.
I think my a last piece of advice would be to understand that members of parliament are normal individuals that have uh, normal jobs, that have bosses, that have superiors, that have goals that they need to achieve to please their bosses. So sometimes when engaging with them, I think another way to communicate with them is for them to understand where the win could be for them. Sometimes it's about finding win-win solutions. When it comes to a minister, for example, their marching orders are in their mandate letters.
Mhm.
So I would, for example, advise everyone, if you're engaging with a minister, read their mandate letter. Uh, Find out who their parliamentary secretary is as well. That's very important. But read the mandate letters, and then if you can insert yourself in a mandate letter item, uh, you'll probably see that your message will be welcomed with open arms. I think that's one way of putting it. Read mandate letters, read platforms, understand people's goals, and understand that they also have deliverables on your end. The deliverables are not just a thing of the private sector.
Yeah, yeah, they've moved on. They've morphed into the public sector. Well, I really appreciate you being here today, and it's been lots of fun chatting with you. I knew it would be. Do you have any last little tidbit or anything that you want to share with us before we end off the
I,
podcast?
I would congratulate the STC on doing one thing that's very important. Is Creating alliances is another very good
Yes.
thing. In French, there's a saying, "L'union fait la force," the strength of many. If you're able to unify many strong voices, big voices in different fields that represent different stakeholders, you hold a different type of weight. You can be seen as a strong partner to government because of the wealth of expertise and knowledge that you bring to the table. So, to perhaps organizations that are quite small that wish to engage with government, if they feel as though alone their message is not being received, or perhaps they feel as though they're not taken seriously, then find other voices in your field with similar interests that you can align with. And then lastly, understanding that these things all take time and patience is key.
Yes.
Um, we've seen the ability of government to act very quickly. For example, during the height of the pandemic, we saw how quickly the government was able to pass legislation and give out aid and whatnot. but that is the exception and not the rule. Most things take time. Most programs take a lot of time. Most policy change come late. Governments are more reactive than they are proactive. So that means they're usually a little behind on everything. So whether it's wanting a change in policy or wanting to be a partner to government, a stakeholder that they rely on, those things take time. So I would advise again, patience is key. Patience is a virtue. I know it's not always easy, and I know that sometimes on some issues can be very much pressing. Sometimes for certain organizations, it can be, uh, uh, a question of life and death, life or death, sorry. And that is no exaggeration. For certain companies,
Mhm.
a change in policy can mean, bankruptcy.
Yes.
So I know that sometimes patience is not always possible, but in most instances, I would always advise to be patient and to build on your relationships. Relationship building is another key point.
Yes. Well, in fact, the SDAC is, from my understanding, the only, well, Canada is the only country that has something like the SDAC. A lot of times in other countries, from what I hear, those organizations are more siloed. So, we don't always see everything eye to eye, but we do manage to
Mhm.
make it work. And, with your help, we're making some great progress. So thank you again, Bryan, for being here. Bryan from Crestview has done such a great job with the SDAC and also explaining some stuff today. I've learned a lot. I want to thank everyone else for joining us. For more supplier diversity contact, make sure that you are going to iwscc.ca. You can find us on YouTube. You can listen in on your favorite podcast platform to hear more podcasts. We're going to be putting every new episodes out every 2 weeks. So, and lots going. We have lots of great themes scheduled for the rest of the year. So, be sure to follow us on all of our social media, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.